Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here today because we are unpacking a topic that is literally fundamental to understanding modern economics. We're diving into India's population dynamics, specifically breaking down Chapter 7 of our source material. Now, if you want to grasp how a nation's resources and future are actually shaped, you have to look at its people. And let me tell you, the numbers we're looking at today are absolutely staggering. So grab your notes, get comfortable, and let's demystify this data together. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to cover the population explosion, track population trends, ask why birth rates are high and death rates are low, and finally, look at how to control the population.
All right, Section 1, the population explosion.
To really grasp the sheer scale of this, just think about this one massive number, 17 million, or, 170 lakhs. That is the number of people added to India's population every single year. To put that into perspective, the source notes that this is basically the equivalent of adding an entire country the size of Australia every year. That really sets the stage for why demographers call this an explosion, right? Which brings us to a crucial textbook definition you are definitely going to want to remember. What exactly is a population explosion? Well, it isn't just a whole lot of people being born. It's a very specific situation. It happens when the death rate falls rapidly, but the birth rate falls at a much, much slower rate. That widening gap between those two lines, that's what creates a steep, dramatic rise in the population. Moving on to Section 2, tracking India's population trends. If we look over a century of growth, two milestones really jump out. First, look at 1951. This is a super important year because it marks the start of economic planning in independent India. The population back then was 36.1 crores, so 361 million people. Fast forward exactly 60 years to 2011, and that number skyrocketed to 121.02 crores, or over 1.2 billion people. In just 6 decades, the population jumped by almost 85 crores. But actually, growth wasn't always this fast. I really want to draw your attention to one specific year, 1921. Demographers actually call 1921 the year of Great Divide. Why? Well, because the decade right before 1921 is literally the only decade in India's recorded census history where the population shrank. It had a negative growth rate of 0.03%. It was a really dark period marked by severe famines and massive epidemics, like cholera and the flu, which caused the death rate to temporarily spike higher than the birth rate. But after 1921, the growth rate stayed positive and just kept climbing. Section 3, why is the birth rate high? First up, let's lock down another crucial metric for the exam. The birth rate is simply the number of live births per 1,000 people during a given year. Remember, it's measured per 1,000 people, not as a percentage. Back in 1951, India's birth rate was a super high 39.9. By 2011, it had dropped, but kind of slowly, down to 21.8. So what keeps that number so stubbornly high? The source material breaks the causes down into two pretty fascinating buckets, social and economic. On the social side, marriage is almost a universal ritual, often happening at an early age, which obviously maximizes the fertility window. There's also a deeply rooted cultural preference for a male child for old age support and religious reasons, meaning families might keep having children until a son is born. On the economic side, we see the real impact of low education and low income. In struggling rural households, a child isn't just viewed as an expense, they're actually seen as an economic asset, extra hands to work and bring in income. And then there's a hidden, honestly pretty tragic factor driving birth rates up, the infant mortality rate. This is the number of infants who die before reaching 1 year of age per 1,000 live births. In 1951, this number was 146. Because historically so many infants just didn't survive due to poor medical care and poverty, families were structurally encouraged to have more children, just to make absolutely sure a few would survive into adulthood. Section 4. Why is the death rate low? Let's explicitly define this one for those taking notes. The death rate is the number of people who die per 1,000 people during a given year. While the birth rate fell slowly over 60 years, the death rate absolutely plummeted. In 1951, it was 27.4. By 2011, down to an incredible 7.1. That is a massive demographic shift. Now, several incredible human advancements caused this drop. It's actually a huge success story. We saw a much higher standard of living and better nutrition. We finally got medical control over lethal epidemics. We saw the miraculous Green Revolution around 1966, which boosted food supplies and practically ended starvation from droughts. Plus, modern transportation meant way faster disaster relief during floods or earthquakes. Basically, all of this meant people were living much, much longer. And right here is the crux of the whole demographic issue. On one side, those social and economic factors mean the birth rate is dropping, but super slowly. On the other side, modern medicine and agriculture mean the death rate dropped incredibly fast. That massive gap in the middle, that is literally where the population explosion happens. Section 5. Controlling the population. So, what can actually be done? The textbook outlines 5 key measures the government uses to stabilize this boom. Mass education to shift social norms, robust family planning programs, raising the legal age of marriage, using government incentives for smaller families, and finally, medical expansion to further reduce infant mortality so people feel secure having fewer kids.
Let's zoom in on the marriage age for a second. The National Population Policy of 2000 emphasized encouraging women to marry at 20 years or older. The logic here is just straight demographic math. Delaying marriage naturally shortens the biological timeframe a woman has to have children, which organically reduces the overall birth rate over her lifetime. But out of all these policies, demographers really hit the nail on the head with this one quote: "Education is the best tool for population control." The data is crystal clear. There is a direct inverse relationship between female education and family size. When women are educated, even just to the primary or middle school level, and have equal job opportunities, the preference for large families drops completely. Education empowers decisions that just naturally shrink family sizes.
Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. By the year 2025, estimates project India's population will reach 139.98 crores. That's practically 1.4 billion people. So the ultimate question for economists isn't just about counting heads, it's about real-world economic survival. How on earth will the nation's limited natural resources, infrastructure, and job markets cope with that kind of staggering scale? It's a huge challenge, and it's going to define India's economic future. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep questioning the data, and I'll catch you next time.